We stand at the beginning of a special week in the United Church of Christ when we observe the gifts of women in the ministries and the lay leadership of our denomination. It's a week that is observed every year, early February, and was created and endorsed and nurtured along by the Coordinating Center for Women in our national setting. I want you to think with me a little bit this morning about the gifts of women, because they dovetail so magnificently with the reading from 1 Corinthians and that energy, and I do mean energy, of faith, hope, and love that they bring into the midst of our lives. I have to start with my own mother, who was very active in St. Paul's United Church of Christ in the little farming community where we lived. So active, in fact, that she was among the first women to be a deacon in that church. You see, many of us lived in that generation when men were deacons, and out there we had elders. Men were certainly elders. She was in that first class of deacons, and she was, in fact, the first woman to be elder in the congregation. And a little bit later on, became president of the consistory, and the consistory basically was their form of a church council. Here we would say a moderator. She was the first woman to be moderator, and she held that role in the life of the church for a solid decade or more. And in the process, of course, made sure that I went to church every Sunday. There was never any excuse tolerated. Along the way, I think about other women who have had powerful influences in my life, teachers who were central in guiding and shaping, people in the churches that I have served. And I'm going to reminisce a little bit about this church, and I always know that that is dangerous because I may pick one person over another, but I have two particular reasons to talk about two lay women that have really been an inspiration for me and for all of us in this congregation. Early on in my ministry with you, we created a 7-year plan. It was called The Future. And one of the dreams of that 7-year plan, which was widely embraced by our congregation, was to renovate the building that we had just purchased, 35 South Main Street. And in particular, the most costly part of that renovation was going to be the basement area, which was at that time a storeroom and the remnants of old coal bins and a trash room and just a musty, dusty old basement. One particular afternoon, I was having a cup of tea with a gal named Helen Barnes. And I went down to her home on Curtis here in town, and she wanted to talk about the effort in which we were engaged. Helen was, I think, probably in her 90s at the time, and I took blueprints and plans and listings of things that we wanted to do, and as we were having tea in her kitchen, at her kitchen table, she was going over everything with great interest. And she looked through everything, and she said, what is going to be the hardest thing for us to do? Isn't that an amazing question? It's not the easiest thing. What will be the hardest thing for us to achieve or do? And I said, probably the complete renovation of the basement at the meeting house. And she said, would you show me that basement? And she put on her coat and we went out to my car, and we drove up here to church, and I took her in the back door of the building, old rickety door at that time, into the storeroom, and she, bless her heart, climbed into the coal bins and inspected them, checked out everything down there, and she said, and so this is going to be a community room, and this is where the kitchen is going to be, and this is where the bathroom is going to be. And she had the blueprints in her hands, and she was walking around that entire space. And she says, I want to do this. This will be my gift to our church. And so we went back to her house. In the process, I made her a copy before we went of the blueprints so she could take them home with her and look at them some more. And the following week, we had a gift from Helen that absolutely inspired all of us, that we could achieve something extraordinary. She loved her church. She had always been active in the church. And in her latter years of life, she said, I have more than enough to survive. I will do this. A few years later, we had another 7-year plan, a 7-year plan that envisioned renovating more space and equipping us with additional staffing and more programs. And again, it's interesting to me that it was one of our older women who saw the possibility and who engaged with the task. And I hope I'm not going to embarrass Carol this morning, but Charlotte Wallace saw the possibility of the renovation of the second floor of the meeting house into a Christian education center. And once again, in conversation with Charlotte and with Carol, that dream of taking 5 old, kind of small offices and a big secretarial area up there and transforming it into beautiful classrooms with state-of-the-art equipment occurred because of their blessing and their activity. The gifts of women in the sustaining of ministry are considerable. And that's not to leave us guys out, but in ever so many ways. Women at the rummage sale, women at the church fair, women at the bake sale. Heaven knows you wouldn't want a pie that I baked. I know that. Women in the church school, women in the choir, women now on our board of deacons and our board of trustees and our church council, sharing in an abundance of ways in taking the energy of God's church out into the world. And we can't forget women at the organ bench and women in ministry. Today, we celebrate Paul's gift to us of chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. It is a wonderful statement of the emotional gift that God needs from every one of us. That determined and powerful gift of faith and hope and love. And it is